Dandadan is an inexplainable work of pure fiction. Even if you were allowed to write a thesis given only the prompt explain what Dandadan is, you would ultimately end up leaving out massive parts of the show. This isn't some anime with a straightforward premise. This is a show that is so hectic and convoluted that it transcends the word plot. It's no longer a show, it's an experience. Now that I've glazed Dandadan thoroughly, how about I explain what I meant by that last statement? How can Dandadan, just some random anime, become so inexplainable? Something so out there that it's no longer a single genre, but rather encapsulates all of fiction. To explain that, we have to go over how Dandadan tells a story. You see, Dandadan is not held back by what's possible in its universe. They have every avenue open to them, and they embrace that. This embrace of the eccentric is what makes the story so unique. But the question lies on how they are able to keep everything tied together so effectively. You'd think having ghosts, aliens, and everything in between would make the story nonsensical. The way that they tie this down is twofold. The first anchor is an overarching objective the story follows. Think of this like this video. The main objective of the video is for me to explain to you what makes Dandadan an experience. I'm sure you can guess what the second anchor is. It's a smaller objective in the story that may or may not progress the overarching story. This isn't a unique concept to Dandadan. In fact, every story can be separated into multiple objectives. The difference between how Dandadan tells stories and how every other story is told is the lack of restraints. Other than Dandadan following a dual-layer objective, everything else is free real estate. Where a show like My Hero has to follow the constraints of the universe, Dandadan is defined by its lack of constraints. In one instance, they will have a fight against a giant alien sumo wrestler, and in the next they will be exploring a Candyland adventure book. What is even more impressive is the way Dandadan writes their mini-arcs. They will take an idea and expand on it for the point of that idea briefly taking over the entire series. I will be going over light spoilers for the series, but trust me when I say regardless of what I spoil, you will have to actually watch the show to fully understand how anything makes sense. The original premise of the story follows Okarun trying to recover his family jewels from both aliens and ghosts alike. Why do they want some random kid's balls, you may ask? Well, because they contain a vast amount of spiritual energy, of course. That is the main story, so side stories like, I don't know, Okarun, Momo, and their friends piloting a giant mech created from their house in order to defeat an invisible Godzilla is also just a small part of the story. How about everybody joining together in order to stop an alien invasion caused by one of the aliens using Okarun's testicles as an energy source for powering a portal? Yep, even that is just a small arc that, in the grand scheme of things, is just a speed bump towards their ultimate goal. Concepts that would be grand theatrical climaxes in any other manga is just a small arc in this one. The possibilities are infinitely expanding with each release of a new chapter. We have new alien races being introduced, new characters, new abilities, new settings, just new everything. There is nothing in this manga that can be contained by a central concept, because the manga has defined itself by its limitless potential. Let's take an even closer look at how these stories unfold. Each sub-arc for Dandadan starts small. It starts as a concept and slowly grows to an astronomical level. Take Okarun's testicles, for example. That's a line I never thought I'd be saying, but at first, the concept of Okarun losing his family jewels was just comedical. But as they had time to develop the testicles' purpose to the story, it became a world-ending device, an almost infinite supply of energy waiting just out of reach. The concept started small, then grew to its absolute limit. Another example is the invisible Godzilla moment. In chapter 62, because of the events of a previous arc, they had to repair the house using alien technology. This substance acts like Iron Man's nanotechnology and is capable of shifting into anything the user imagines. In the next chapter, they are led to an apartment because of the rumor of a floating ball. In the grand scheme of the story, these concepts are incredibly small and in line with the universe. Nothing sticks out at this point as being something overly far-fetched. Now that they've created this link with the already accepted concepts in the universe and something new, this is when they go hog wild. The floating ball turns out to be an invisible Godzilla that can transform into a kaiju-sized problem, and the house is transformed into a massive Power Ranger-styled mech. They took the idea of a mysterious floating ball and flipped it into a completely unexpected outcome. They also took the nanomachines, stretching their original preconceived rule sets into something fantastical. It is the way that these concepts are originally set, then stretched, which makes the story so entertaining. There's never a moment you can guess what's going to happen next. Never. These subplots are not self-contained either. Sometimes they can bring out past tools in order to help them with their current issues. Past Mouska tools if you want to call them. The closest comparison to this manga would be a Diet One Piece. One Piece is an achievement of astronomical proportions. Some people even believe the series to be one of the greatest works of fiction ever conceived. It's easy to tell why people believe this. This show is over 1,000 chapters with its plot spanning years of development. They've had characters introduced in double-digit chapters that suddenly come up again in chapter 1100. The amount of foreshadowing and build-up they do is so groundbreaking at the very least, or revolutionary at its peak. The commonality between these two mediums is surprisingly their stretching of extreme concepts. One Piece will take you to Disneyland Island made of food and talking inanimate objects in one episode, then bring you to a giant walking elephant with a city on its back in the next. One Piece does not have restraints, but it is instead defined by the freedom it crafted through the way it decided to tell its stories, and that way is through the use of islands. Each subplot is isolated with a single central island. The island introduces concepts that, in isolation to the island, make complete sense. They then expand on it more and more till it's integrated into the entire whole of the world. This is executed differently than Dandadan, but still delivers us with the same insane concepts regardless of execution. The freedom in writing these two shows share is unique to the current landscape of manga today. Most manga, even those with the wildest of premises, stick to their original ideas. Take for instance Kaiju number 8, which focuses solely on kaiju and how the world develops around its existence. One Punch Man's fights between Saitama and Goro was expanded to such an unforeseen degree of power, yet remained in the concepts they've laid out. I can list a dozen manga that keeps to their original concepts, never straying too far from their original selling points. So, I will! The Boxer, Mission Yozakura Family, Undead Unluck, Twin Star Exorcists, Demon Slayer, The Elusive Samurai, Akane Banashi, Solo Leveling, Get Schooled, Hardcore Leveling Warrior, Yuno and Kawachan, and Bastards. I added some absolute sleepers in there. If anyone read all of those, let me know in the comments. I don't believe a world exists where somebody has read all of the ones I've listed above, so if you have, prove me wrong. And before people misinterpret what I mean by never straying too far from their original concepts, let me further define it. Look at Demon Slayer for example. That show focuses entirely on fighting demons during Japan's Taisho period. Just by me saying that, you can understand what you are getting into. The entire show will remain like that regardless of what happens. The places they visit will reflect the era, the people they fight will be demons. It's all laid out in episode 1. Now, let's look at one which does shake things up drastically. Jujutsu Kaisen. The show's premise is Jujutsu sorcerers fighting curses during a modernized Japan, which, even though the Shibuya incident arc changes a lot about the show, the premise still remains the exact same. One Piece's premise is that Luffy wants to find the One Piece. A straightforward premise, but shortly after crossing the red line, that premise is stretched more and more. It's not just about the One Piece, it's about the entire world. Yet the premise technically remains the same, but the story can no longer be contained by that singular premise. Even if I stretch the premise to Luffy travels between fantastical islands in search for the One Piece, disrupting the government along the way, that still doesn't consider the effects Luffy has on the world, including the islands he visits. Even if I were to stretch the premise to encompass everything currently happening in the show, it would neglect the humble beginnings the manga started at. If you were to then describe that premise to somebody wanting to watch the show, they wouldn't even get to see a fraction of what that premise is for hundreds of episodes. The reason for this is because of how One Piece was designed with the idea of expansion. Everything expands more and more. This includes the fantastical nature of the show. Islands get more and more creative, people get more and more unique, the scope of the show grows exponentially, resulting in an infinitely evolving premise. The only way for you to perfectly define the show would be to wait for its conclusion, because if you try to give it a premise now, it might introduce something completely different and new to the story. Similarly, how Dandadan introduces something fantastical and new every 15 chapters, since we've defined the premise of a couple of shows, let's now go over the Magic of Dandadan's premise. The easiest way for a person to describe Dandadan is for them to just not. Okay, but I'll humor you for a second. Dandadan is about a person trying to get his testicles from a ghost and aliens alike because they hold magical powers. It's also a love story about Momo and Okarun. That is the main premise of the story, yet it sounds like it's almost missing the point. That's because it's almost dancing around the real reason people read it. Dandadan dances around the tragic moments, beautiful meetings, comedy, horror, romance, fantasy, sci-fi, ghosts, aliens, and everything in between. Dandadan has all of these things within one manga series. Its boundaries are not born by what stories it's capable of telling, but by what stories it isn't capable of telling. And then it tells those stories out of sheer spite. What I'm trying to express is that the premise I stated a few moments ago is filled with the craziest ideas and concepts bundled up into a single sentence. It's not the words that defined Dandadan in that sentence, but the sentence itself. Dandadan isn't just a story about finding two cojones, but about the art of fiction. It can't be put into a solid premise because its appeal is in its lack of a consistent premise. But how does Dandadan separate itself from One Piece? We went over how both are similar, but they don't actually feel similar. If you read Dandadan, it's much more similar in tone to a different manga, which we will talk about more later on. What makes the two stories different feeling is based off of a few key aspects. We will start with one of the most important ones, pacing. Dandadan stories are on the shorter end, with several only lasting in the single digits. Their longest arc by far is the Space Invasion arc, lasting 45 chapters. One Piece's longest arc, on the other hand, is the Wano arc, lasting a whopping 148 chapters long. Not only is it drastically smaller than the Wano arc, but if we ranked every One Piece arc by how long they are, Dandadan's Space Invasion wouldn't even be in the top 10. It's no surprise that One Piece is longer than Dandadan. I mean, come on, Cammy. One number's bigger than the other. The reason that this is so important is because both introduce insane things, but Dandadan does it in 1/10 of the time. Where One Piece fleshes out entire communities, their political ecosystems, and the world and even mailing infrastructure, Dandadan just goes, let's make the Loch Ness Monster an alien. They don't try to create a reasonable explanation. They don't try to make it fit perfectly into the world. They just try to make it entertaining. This desire for making each chapter entertaining results in a rapid fire of more and more insane things. This creates a pacing to match, which is one of the main reasons why Dandadan's arcs are so short. Another key separating factor is the scale between the two stories. One Piece is a planet-sized lore book, while Dandadan is more on the smaller community-based stories. Dandadan does have its grandiose moments, but they aren't to the level of One Piece. It's more similar in scale, but not similar in development. One show that does feel similar to Dandadan is a little indie show, not sure if you guys ever heard of it. It's called Chainsaw Man. It's a real sleeper. Give it a watch if y'all got some time. Chainsaw Man and Dandadan have a similar pace, a similar sense of comedy, and a similar urge for fantastical, unexpected moments. It comes to no surprise that the author of Dandadan was an assistant on Fire Punch, the manga that Fujimoto released before Chainsaw Man. On a brief note, Fire Punch is a pretty cool manga visually. The story, on the other hand, has a similar Chainsaw Man thrill to it, but it isn't a top-tier story. It's somewhat all over the place if you'd ask me. I still enjoy reading it, don't get me wrong, but it felt like the story lost its purpose in the later half. Chainsaw Man is an incredible piece of work that's hard not to focus on. From its visuals to its story, there is little not to like about the manga. What Dandadan has in common to Chainsaw Man is their unique tone. These two authors have a very unique way of always surprising the reader. The easiest way of explaining this is through an example. In Season 1 of Chainsaw Man, Denji's goal is to get laid. This being our main character's goal is incredibly surprising to say the least. Similarly to how the main character's goal in Dandadan is to recover Okarune's coin pouch. Both main characters have hyper unique goals, but that's not all. Chainsaw Man is filled with random moments of instant insanity. For example, the moment that Katana Devil is introduced. On the flip side of that, Dandadan have similar moments of instant change in the story's tempo. Take this moment for instance. I'm not going to go into complete detail, all you need to know is that when the guy touches cold water he turns evil and tries to kill everybody. The only way to turn him back is to splash him with hot water. So, we get scenes like these where everything is quiet in one panel, then instantly he's trying to kill everyone in the next. If that's a bit of a stretch, we also have this scene. Momo is a waiter at a cafe like normal, then in the next instance, everyone looks like that one dream guy. Y'all all know the exact character I'm talking about whenever you see this picture too. These shows have a way of doing two things perfectly. One is always surprising you, and two is always surprising you, and three is changing the story's tempo instantly. You like what I did there? Their ability to do these two core things keep the show interesting. The two writers also have a keen eye for the story's tension. Whenever the story slows down even a little bit, they introduce something new seemingly out of nowhere. This immediate response with something so jarring not only keeps the audience engaged, but also captures that interest for hours. What you all might be expecting is for me to say how Chainsaw Man also disregards the notion of a solid premise, when the contrary is true. Chainsaw Man's story is a straightforward with very little deviation. Yes, more aspects of the story is explored, especially in Act 2, but the main rule set remains the same. Denji tries to find happiness after acquiring the power to turn into a devil. What I love about Chainsaw Man is the way Denji is represented in the story. He's an absolute idiot who's driven by animalistic qualities due to being raised like an animal. He's never been to school, never lived in a proper home, never ate a proper meal. He's simply trying to get by as a kid with nothing, and even then the nothingness he has is stripped away from him. It's a story of Denji trying to find his happiness, only for everyone else wanting something different for him. It's never as simple as getting something for him, it's always, I'll give you this, but you will lose this in return. It shows how happiness comes at a cost, and how, even if you pay that cost, you will still lose it all the same. And also shows how Power is the greatest character in all of anime. I love her so much. Chainsaw Man having a premise is due to Fujimoto knowing what he wants from the story and where he wants to go. If you were to read all of Act 1 of the manga, you would know exactly what I'm talking about. Once everything comes together, it feels like a true grand experience. This is the reason why Dandadan both feels like Chainsaw Man, but also doesn't at the same time. Though Dandadan's story is held down by two plots, a main plot and a subplot like most anime are, there is something that ties each story into one another I haven't gone over yet. Since not every episode has something to do with Okarune's family nuts and bolts, that also means that they need a reason for the story's existence, the glue that holds all of Dandadan together. Without this one tie, Dandadan would make absolutely no sense, that tie being Momo and Okarune's relationship. Since the very beginning, the story was never focused solely on Okarune getting his balls back, but was also about their relationship with one another. What started as a small spark has only grown over the course of 160 chapters. What makes this even better is that their relationship really feels like it's moving. We've all sat through those harem anime where the main character will never get with a girl. There's always the illusion of a relationship progressing, but out of fear of harming their entire industry, the best we will ever get is a peck on the cheek. Then, after the main girl lets her heart out, the next episode we get is a goofy, "Oh no, I tripped with my whole ass and just sat on your face, whoops!" Luckily, this has nothing like that. Each subplot focuses on both Okarune and Momo. Because of this, we have several moments allowing them to grow as people. Even during the plots that introduce new characters, they normally have these characters' introduction affect Momo and Okarune's relationship. The reason for this is twofold. It both puts strain on the relationship, allowing it to grow, and also integrates the character flawlessly into the group's dynamic. Most, if not all, of the characters introduced immediately affect how Momo and Okarun feel towards one another. Most of the time, it's a new love interest that has the hots for one of them. If there was no conflict in the love story, then it would become stale and repetitive. This constant addition of increasing love interests increases the tension of the love story. Stack on top of that an increasing number of life and death situations, and we got ourselves a bona fide banger. It's simply another aspect of the manga that allows for another genre to be introduced. Not only is it an additional genre, but it's also a beautiful way of integrating each character into the story. Start a subplot off with a mysterious problem, follow that up with said problem involving a new character. Once that problem is solved, give them relevance to the future of the story by having their existence strain Okarun's relationship with Momo. Since their relationship is one of the original core aspects of the story, anything affecting the relationship will immediately give them relevance going forward. Not only does it do all of that, but it also gives you relevance in the downtime between subplots. If you think about it, Dandadan is actually two stories running simultaneously to one another. The first story is a romance. I've gone over that a bunch, so that's to be expected. The second is everything else. This video is about why Dandadan is more than an anime. Of course my answer wasn't going to be simple. In one of the earlier chapters, we get introduced to this woman. Every day she would go to work at a convenience store, and every night she would sell her body. Each month she would scrape by with the little funds she had left. Yet every night she would return home with a smile. The panel of her standing outside of her small apartment tells it all. The outside is covered in dirt and cluttered junk. The ground is darkened with stain marks as even rust is visible on the metal pipes. The amount of details in this one scene darkens it, only reinforcing how horrific the outside world is to her. She opens the door with a lifeless stare as a beam of light emanates from within. That's when we get to see the reason why she goes through all of this. The reason she can wake up every morning and endure a hellish life. She has a daughter. The moment the daughter looks up with a smile on her face, the woman can't help but smile back. The house is filled with bright lights and smiling faces. If you look close enough, you can even see the house is still a rundown mess. They keep the toilet paper under the dining room table. The floor is old and scuffed. The walls also showed the same wear to them. Though they live in these circumstances, they still found joy in one another. One day, as she's walking home from work, she sees a small dress in the window. In the very next page, we see men destroying the small joy left in her life. Her daughter cries in the corner wearing that same dress from the window. Everything around her is becoming distorted with dark lines as a hellish outside world invades their home. As one of the men pick the daughter up, the lines inch closer and closer in. As she cries out to her mother, we can see the woman's face still beaming with light, only for it to be snuffed out by a large boot. We can see in the next panels the reason why they came to her house was to collect the rest of the funds she owed them. The men leave with their daughter, and we get to see the woman's face drowning in the darkness. The last shred of light left is in her right eye. We then see her chasing after the car, only for her to fall in the rain. Blood covers the sidewalk as it pours from her mouth. She lowered her head to the ground, and we are left with this single panel. The framing for the panels in this scene is off, leaving nearly half of the page black. There was nothing left for her, only the memory. We cut to her standing on top of a building, looking out in the bleak world. Memories of her daughter flash before her mind. As the rain pours down around her, she lifts her one leg and dances. The woman's graceful movements and beautiful strides paint a possible picture leading her situation. She must have been a dancer prior to having her daughter. We can assume she had to give up her dancing in order to take care of her. Something happened to the father, leaving them in debt and forcing her down her horrible life. That assumption, and everything else I've told you so far, was conveyed entirely without any dialogue. The first instance of words spoken in the entire memory comes in the final two panels. The first is a flashback of her daughter holding her, whispering, "There, there, mommy." And in the final panel, as the woman leaps from the building, we see the final words her daughter told her: "Thank you, always." This is the acrobatic Silky. The backstory we just watched is from this apparition. Ghosts in Dandadan are spirits whose emotions have become twisted, changing them into horrific abominations. They desire something from their past lives, but that desire forces them down a path of destruction. The way Dandadan can display such powerful scenes without a single word is a display of their prowess in the art form. Not only is the way they tell their story powerful, but also in their ability to switch the tone in an instant is equally commendable. The manga is nearly as freeform as water, having the characters search for Okarune's balls in one instance, to telling a beautiful story of heartbreak in the next. Continuing the story, while the woman was wandering the earth as a spirit, a child mistaken her for her deceased mother. From that moment on, the woman protected the child from harm, having her emotions twisted as time crept forward. As her spirit crumbles away, she drowns in her regrets as a mother. If she's unable to let her regrets go, she will never transcend to nirvana and will simply return to a void of nothingness. She remembers her daughter's face after years of forgetting it. Her legs crumble beneath her as her tears fall down her face. She regrets never being able to buy her better clothes, not spending enough time with her, even regrets being her mother. She brought nothing but misfortune to her daughter, and she regretted it all. That's when Shiatori hugs her. This is the girl she had first mistaken as her daughter all those years ago. An interesting fact about this beautiful image is how the woman is deteriorating. When her daughter was taken from her, her left eye was the only thing she could see out of, and now that Shiatori is acting as her daughter, her right eye is the only thing she can see out of. Possibly a way of showing how the last thing her right eye saw was her daughter being taken away, and now as a spirit the last thing her eye will see is her daughter returning to her, albeit not her real daughter, but as her stand-in. Shiatori says to the crumbling spirit, "Mom, I love you, because I was the happiest in the whole universe. Never would I have imagined this manga will pull something this powerful off in a mere 2 chapters." I'm not sure how many times I have to remind you, but this is the same show that the characters give a cow to an alien so that his son can get a blood transfusion, since alien blood is actually just cow's milk. We even have eerie scenes such as these, which look like panels stripped straight out of a horror movie. These chapters with heartbreaking stories are capable of happening at any moment, which only makes them hit even harder. These moments are also not frequent reoccurrences, but are instead used sparingly. All of these deliberate choices compound on top of one another, creating suspense in the story simply for existing in previous arcs. Will this arc be goofy? Will it be more romance focused? Will there be a horror twist? Will there be a sad backstory? Will someone die? Is this a story about ghosts or aliens? Their structure lies not on the commonalities between their arcs, but on their lack of commonalities. It feels almost as though the story is alive. Each arc, the story morphs and changes, taking what it learned from the past and growing from it. The deeper the story progresses, the more you can feel this happening. It truly feels like the only thing that stays the same are the characters, while the world itself changes around them. What's even more important is that the characters aren't staying the same, they are rounded in their growth. This is more evident when looking at Momo and Okarune. Momo has grown, not just when referring to her relationship with Okarune. She has learned to respect her grandmother, made mistakes, and learned from them to become a better person. I know I'm kind of beating around the bush with my explanation, but I'm trying to save these moments for you to experience them yourselves. You're just gonna have to trust me with what I'm saying. Flipping over to Okarune, he's experienced and overcome jealousy, learned to accept his emotions and pursue them, and gained confidence when he once had none. While the world changes around them at a rapid pace, the characters change slowly over time. I guess this would be a good moment to highlight some deep message Dandadan is trying to display by creating their stories in this way. Humans change, but something, your destiny. Got it. Alright, these moments of blistering absurdity and deep emotion show how versatile of a story Dandadan truly is. They have the ability of telling the strangest story, but in the same note, they can switch it to something more profound. Their only limits are their imagination. Regardless of the idea or scene, they will find a way of doing it. You might believe that to be careless, and you would be right. If not for Dandadan's willingness to go as deep into absurdity as possible, because of their rapid introduction of more and more insane concepts, Dandadan has created a reputation for themselves. They are the manga that will be anything. They are the manga that will experiment. They've done it so much that the readers are expecting insanity. They are expecting the unexpected. And even then it surprises them. I've went over it a little bit when talking about the acrobatic Silky's backstory, but this deserves its own section. The art for Dandadan is beautiful. Now that this isn't some Berserk level of beauty, but it's beautiful in its own way. Berserk's art is gorgeous because of the time spent by Miura. Hours meticulously perfecting a single page of Berserk wasn't enough for Miura. He would spend days perfecting pieces like these. Simply looking at one of his 2-page spreads, you could easily see the beauty in it. Dandadan, on the other hand, is beautiful because of the story behind these images, in their depictions of a vast alien militia to the smaller moments of wonder and beauty. Each of these moments capture the story perfectly. Look at this page, for example. The way the characters burst through the building with explosive speed, the way his body is stretched behind him with long, jagged streaks, his leg extended hazily in front of him as it bends like a cartoon character. Even his clothes are being torn violently away by the sheer wind pressure, and the way Momo is being pulled behind him, drawn in a completely different art style. It's just so good. Or maybe the scene of Momo learning something super shocking. I've already showed you the acrobatic Silky hug, don't make me have to pull that out again. What's even more amazing is the sheer number of double-page spreads the manga is capable of spitting out. I tried looking up how many of them were in the manga, but I couldn't find anybody keeping track. If you want to see a really cool representation of how many double-page spreads there are, just open up Google Images and scroll. Yeah, you will see spoilers, but you will also see dozens upon dozens of new and interesting double-page spreads. If you want something even more compelling to how many there are, just go watch this guy's video. Yeah, there are so many double-page spreads that this guy made a video about it. Some of these chapters even have multiple double-page spreads, like upwards of 3 of them. They may not be as intricate as Berserk, but they are still fun surprises to an already insane manga. And I don't want that to be interpreted as a diss towards Dandadan. Some of these double-page spreads have a lot of care put into them, just not as much as the GOAT Berserk. Let's now talk about Dandadan's OP. As of the writing of the script, Dandadan's anime isn't out yet, but that's okay, because what I'm really wanting to talk about is not the entire OP, just the song. The Dandadan OP was created by a band called Creepy Nuts. I've listened to a few of their songs, and as a person who can't understand a single word they are saying, they've released some bangers. Not only am I a fan of their work, but you are too. You just haven't realized it yet. Let's go through a brief history of the band's previous works for anime. This is all being taken from this article right here. If you want a more in-depth explanation behind why they wrote some of these songs, I'll be sure to leave the link down below if you want to check that out. Their first song featured in an anime was a song called Sang Up Lullaby, which was included as an outro for Call of the Night. Their next song was also in Call of the Night as its OP. The name of the song is called Da Ten. It's a very vibrant, makes you want to dance kind of song. Next up is a small sleeper hit by the name of Bling Bang Bang Born. The song included in Mashal as its second OP. This is their most popular song, blowing up in both Japan and in the US at the same time. The song created for Dandadan's OP is called Otoko. It's important to note that Creepy Nuts' music is very unique. They intentionally go out of their way in order to create something that doesn't currently exist. If we are to look at Bling Bang Bang Born, for instance, the title of the song doesn't even make sense. It was a made-up word used by the rapper as a sort of hype-up spell. If we then look over to Otanoko, we can see just how unique their music can get. The intro of Otoko has them saying Dandadan over and over again. As the music swells, we get a brief instance of rest before R. Shitai, the rapper, goes in with some solid verses. Because I can't understand the words being said, it allows me to focus more on the tone of the music as well as the instruments of the piece. Speaking of instrumentals, it's filled with these squeaking noises, bringing out the truly strange aspect of the song. It's almost as if a strange creature is laughing as the music plays. It's a perfect way of adding the strange aspects of Dandadan into its opening song. There's then a transition to the song about midway through. This transition is instant, slowing down the track while adding a focus on higher pitched vocals and instruments. The way that the instruments transition in this moment almost feel as though it's playing the track in reverse. It's almost incomprehensible what's being played behind the rapper, other than the piano piece that's being played in the background. If I were to describe this part of the instrumentals as a physical object, I would say it sounds like a thick layer of fog or the depth of the ocean. As the song approaches its third transition, the sound of a piano escapes the jumble of instruments, leading us into yet another tonal shift. We have the speed of the first half of the song, but focused even more on a higher pitched tone. The song closes out with the rapper ending the song as it started by repeating the word Dandadan. Otoko is a perfect OP for Dandadan. It captures everything about Dandadan perfectly. The dark moments of intensity, the rapid tonal changes, the mist of confusing unknowns, the shift into a brighter future is done so beautifully it's astounding how good of a match Crazy Nuts was for this show. It's like they were meant for one another. But we all know if Okarun found his nuts, the show would have been over before it ever started. As you can tell, Dandadan has a deep fascination with the unknown. There are several moments during the series that embracing the unknown actually brings about a healthier outcome. Even just looking at the previous story involving acrobatic Silky, we can see this happening. Instead of rejecting everything that doesn't meet societal norms, they try to understand them for what they are. This is a lesson that thousands of people can learn. Instead of looking at things as a collective group, come to understand each person as individuals. Yes, bad things come from the unknown. If Dandadan killed every single spirit without ever trying to understand them, then we would have never gotten some of the best moments in the story's history. It's hard to scrape away the endless possibilities or statistical means surrounding groups of people, but looking at people as just a number on the graph is entirely dehumanizing. If we are to look at the majority of aliens in Dandadan, we would find that the vast majority want the protagonists killed, yet they still find people amongst those numbers. But who am I to take a deeper meaning from a show about some kid finding his marbles? To round this video up, Dandadan is a beautiful story taking aspects from every point in fiction and putting them into a single story. Whenever looking at it from an episode by episode basis, the story flows seamlessly into each arc. However, when we look at the series as a whole, we can truly see how fantastical and ever-expanding the story has become. I know we jump around a lot when talking about the manga. At points I was talking about other manga more than Dandadan itself. The show is just so ever-expanding and fantastical it's hard to pin down a solid premise without using something else as a reference. But isn't that the point? We jumped around various works of fiction to describe a show that is based on jumping around various works of fiction. The end result of this video was never me trying to explain the entirety of Dandadan. It was about me conveying the premise to you. It was never about the words in the sentence, but about the sentence itself. That's what makes Dandadan into an experience. Thank you guys for coming and watching. Like, comment, subscribe, and as always, Johnny.